Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. Earlier this year, I moved to New Mexico. I'm originally from Philadelphia, and moving out west was a huge culture shock. Between the sheer emptiness of the place and the long drives, I almost felt like I was in another country. I had moved in with my aunt, who lived alone. She was getting older and was finding it hard to take care of herself after my uncle passed away. Since I didn't really have much going on back at home, I volunteered to come out and stay with her for a while and just help with things around the house. I worked remotely anyway. I love my aunt, and the little town she lives in is beautiful, and the locals are all extremely nice, nothing like back home. But it was boring for me because I didn't know anyone. I mean, how much Netflix can you possibly watch? So, looking for something to do, I did the logical thing and made a Tinder profile. I matched up with a few different girls, and some of them were nice enough, but they all lived pretty far away. Eventually, I met this really cute girl named Emily, and we really started hitting it off. She lived 90 minutes away in Santa Fe, which by New Mexico standards was right down the road. A few days later, I ended up driving out to meet her for a date, and we had a blast. We both wanted to see each other again, and I made plans to come back the following Friday. Little did I know that Friday night would be the most terrifying night of my life. The roads out west are dark. I don't mean dim or kind of hard to see. I mean pitch black, can't see jack. Dark. I was sort of getting used to it, but it still kind of bugged me out. Anyway, Emily had to work until 8 in the evening, so I planned to pick her up from her house around 10. Yeah, I was kind of banking on her letting me stay over, so I didn't have to drive home at 3 in the morning. I had been driving for about 45 minutes and had only passed 2 other cars on the road. The last one had been 20 minutes prior. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station, and subconsciously slowed down quite a bit. That's probably what saved the guy's life. At least initially. I just happened to glance up, and at the last second I saw someone frantically waving their arms in the middle of the road right in front of my car. I slammed on my brakes, but it was too late, and I simultaneously felt and heard the impact. Luckily, they were off to the side a bit, but the person was still hurled back about 10 feet, and my car made a horrific screeching noise as I came to a stop. My Jeep is pretty old and didn't have airbags, but luckily my seatbelt stopped me from slamming my head on the wheel. After a second, I came to the realization that I had just hit someone. I was shaking so badly that it took me a few seconds to unclip my seatbelt, but when I did, I opened my car and ran outside to the body lying in the road. It was a young guy, probably in his early 20s or so. He wasn't wearing a shirt, his jeans were all torn up, and he was missing a shoe. As far as I could tell, he was unconscious but breathing. I ran back to the car to get my cell phone, but of course you don't get service here because I was literally in the desert. I wasn't sure what to do at this point, so I just went back to the guy and crouched down next to him. I got a good look at him at this point and realized he was very unhealthy looking. He was emaciated and looked super sickly. As I sat there for another minute, weighing my options, I heard something coming out of the darkness on the side of the road. It sounded like the growl a house dog would make, only it was throatier, almost like a choking or gargling sound. I don't have the words to really explain, but it wasn't a noise I had ever heard any living creature make. Trying to convince myself it was a coyote or something, I grabbed the guy under the armpits and started dragging him back to my Jeep. I was going to put him in the passenger seat and drive him to the hospital in Santa Fe, or flag someone down for help if I got the chance. When I got to the passenger side of the car, I realized the door was locked. Luckily, I was driving with my window down. I laid the guy down gently and walked around to the other side and unlocked the door. I walked to the trunk of my Jeep, thinking maybe I had some clothes or something to cover the guy up with. The least I could do was make him comfortable. Not finding anything useful, I closed the trunk and walked back to the passenger side. The guy was sitting up. His shoulders were pumping up and down rapidly, almost like he was hyperventilating. I was behind him, but it seemed like he was staring at something straight ahead, right where my headlights were pointing. I looked up. This thing was standing in the dead center of the road. It was on all fours, but its hind legs were twice as long as its front, giving it a weird sloping angle. It had a row of needle-thin quills running up its spine, each at least a foot long. It was salivating something viscous and black, steam rising from the pavement wherever it dripped in thick clumps. Even hunched down the way it was, it still had to be taller than me, and I stood 6'1". We were completely still at this point, almost like we were waiting for the other to act. So this guy decided it would be him, I guess. He let out a scream that seemed like it filled the entire desert. I don't know how he did it, but 1 second he was sitting down, and the next he was sprinting off the road into the darkness. The creature opened its mouth impossibly wide and let out its own scream, perfectly mimicking the tone and pitch the guy had just made. I bolted for the back of the Jeep. I felt something hard slam into the hood, and I just stood crouched in silence. I waited a few moments, the whole time hearing the guy screaming repeatedly, getting farther and farther away. I couldn't see the dude or the creature. My heart was pounding and I was trying not to throw up. After a few moments, I stood up, looked through the rear windshield, and didn't see anything. I crept up along the side of my car, got to the door, and quietly opened it. Then I heard that same scream again, this time right behind me. One hand on the door, I pulled it shut behind me as I dove into the car. Something hard hit the side of my Jeep, and for a split second I thought I was going to tip. I never turned the car off, so I just reached down with my hand and pushed down on the gas. Of course, the car was in park and the engine just strained like it was about to burst. I reached up with my other hand, shifted into drive, and my car leapt forward. I drove about 50 feet, shifted myself so I was sitting, and then waited. He never came back. I can't be certain, but there is a good chance that this guy is dead, and I'm partly, if not totally, to blame. I never went to see Emily that night. I drove till I hit an intersection and just ended up taking the long way back to my aunt's. There is something unnatural out there in the New Mexico desert. This story happened in New York City, and I haven't had a good night's sleep since. I was friends with a group of 3 guys who liked to identify themselves as urban explorers. They would root out abandoned warehouses and factories, open manholes, and walk through the subway tunnels. They didn't really have any goal that I was aware of. I guess they just liked the sense of adventure. I had listened to a bunch of their stories and asked if I could join them on their next excursion, to which they agreed. I'm not sure why I did it and would later come to completely regret it. We had decided to explore a little stretch of abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of one of the boroughs. I'm not going to give specifics. I don't want to be responsible for anyone else getting hurt. The night came, I caught the bus and met them about half hour's walk away. These guys traveled light, just some headlamps and flashlights, though one guy actually had a crowbar. The property around the buildings was fenced off, but it must have been ages since anyone had come to inspect it. There were plenty of openings we could slip through, and even found a spot that looked like it was completely torn open. There was lots of graffiti and litter all over the place, but we didn't see anyone else. We headed to the closest warehouse, a 5-story brick building with all of the windows smashed in or missing. There wasn't even a door, so we're able to walk right in. And honestly, it was pretty underwhelming. I guess it was cool for the first few minutes, almost like walking through a little piece of recent history. But after you've seen one empty and dusty room, then you've seen them all. In one of the rooms, we found a few garbage bags filled with odds and ends and a few blankets. Probably some poor guy who was down on his luck and sleeping here. But again, there wasn't anybody around. We walked all around the building, going all the way to the roof. The view was nice, but I was ready to just leave and call it a night. But once we got back to the main floor, we found a door that we must have missed the first time. It wasn't locked, but it was wedged pretty tight. We all took turns trying to unsuccessfully open it until Crowbar Guy earned his name and popped it open. It was pitch black, but we had our headlamps and could see that it was a flight of stairs that led straight down. There was also an odd, slightly rotten smell coming from below. I felt a little uneasy, but this was the kind of stuff these guys lived for. They didn't hesitate and just started walking down the stairs. I didn't want to wait up here by myself, so I followed. The staircase went on for longer than I had expected, and by the time it leveled off, I couldn't even tell how far we had come. The smell was much more intense now. I actually had to take my beanie off and hold it over my nose and mouth. It didn't really help. It was obvious that this place was pretty much untouched since being abandoned. There were a bunch of desks and chairs along with stacks upon stacks of paperwork and random supplies. The basement was roughly the size of the main floor, making it pretty expansive. I had a really bad feeling, but the other guys weren't hearing it. And as we went deeper, the smell became almost unbearable. Eventually, we came to the widest room we had found yet, and what we saw made me sick to my stomach. A human body, was lying on the floor in the middle of the room. Hunched over it was something I can't logically explain. It had pale gray flesh, almost white. Its hands were inside of the body, moving around like they were searching for something. It didn't have ears or a nose that I could see, only a pair of bloodshot red eyes that latched onto us as soon as it saw us. Everything stopped for a few seconds, my group and the creature just staring at each other. Then I threw up. It just happened. I don't know if it was the sight in front of me, the smell, or pure fear. But I puked all over the floor. My sudden movement and the noise but have startled the beast because a moment later it was standing straight up, its head almost touching the 8-foot-high ceiling. One of the guys started yelling, and I felt a hand grab me from behind and pull me around. We all started running. This thing let out terrible screams behind us, like it was trying to yell with fluid in its mouth. It must have been chasing us, because a few times I could hear slamming noises from behind us, like it was kicking the furniture out of the way, but I didn't dare look back. We made it to the bottom of the stairs, and I was the last one in the group. Just as I ducked under the door frame, something slammed into the wall beside my head. I don't know what it was, but it made a wet thud as it impacted. I raced up through the door onto the main floor, and one of the other guys was waiting to slam the door behind me. I just kept running out into the yard, and everybody caught up a moment later. We ran to the fence line, ducked through a hole, and only then decided to look back. There was no sign of the creature. When we all took a moment to calm down, we started talking about what we just saw and what we should do. None of us even had an inkling what that thing was, but we could all agree that it was not a human. I said that we needed to go to the police, that somebody had died in that building, but one of the other guys said, "No, man, think about how it would look." Were we really going to go to the police and tell them that some kind of monster was eating a homeless person in the basement of an abandoned building? Even if they believed us and went to the building, what would happen? If they found the body, would they think it was us? We weren't even supposed to be there in the first place. I'm ashamed to admit it, but he was right. We didn't go to the police and we didn't tell anybody. I didn't really see those guys too much after this incident, and as far as I know, that was the end of their urban exploration. I know it sounds crazy. It is crazy, but it happened just like I told it. Stay out of places like this. God only knows what else lurks in the dark corners and basements of civilization. I kind of have an obsession with trail cameras. I asked for one for Christmas and was so excited when I got it. I think I've owned a dozen of them over the course of my life. It's really nerdy just how into trail cameras I am. I'm the kind of guy that watches reviews of them on YouTube and is keeping up on the latest models. Everyone has their own weird obsession, and mine is trail cameras. I have my trail camera on my grandpa's property. It's about an hour north from where I live. He owns about 100 acres out there. I've had my cameras all over the property. I download the cameras and move their positions every couple of weeks. Most people use their trail cameras for hunting purposes. They're trying to figure out if they have any big bucks wandering around in the area that they can hope to get. I don't really use them like that. I mostly just use them to try and get cool pictures of animals. I actually have a spreadsheet that I use to keep track of my sightings. At some point back when I was in high school, I looked up all the possible animals I could catch on my camera. I made a list of them and have been tracking it ever since. Raccoons and opossums are the most common sightings, but I see lots of deer too. I thought I was looking at a deer when I caught this thing on my camera. I've had a big old 8-point wandering around for a year or so now. I have a dozen pictures of it that I show to my buddies. The pictures started from pretty far away. The camera was in night vision mode, so the pictures are pretty grainy and tinted green. It's far away, but you can pretty clearly make out the shining eyes and the silhouette of its antler rack against the moon. When I first saw these pictures, I was pretty excited because of the rack. It was absolutely huge. I knew that I had probably never seen this particular buck before, and that made me pretty happy. That's why I put these things out, is to see new animals. I got about a dozen pictures of this creature. My camera takes pictures whenever it senses motion. It seems like the creature was moving towards my camera, almost as if it could sense that it was there. As it got closer and closer and the image became clearer, I began to realize that it was not a deer at all. For one thing, it seemed to be bipedal. It was standing on 2 legs for the most part, and would occasionally use its front arms for support like a gorilla. Also, it was way too tall for a deer. In one image, it's standing like a man and its rack is probably 8 feet in the air. If the whole deal with it standing on 2 legs hadn't tipped me off that it wasn't a deer, its head and body certainly would have. Its face was long like a deer, but even in the grainy green trail cam photos, it was apparent that it was like a skull. I wondered if maybe this was some deer with a rotting flesh disease. Its body was weird too. It's like its whole torso was wrapped in some sort of cage and extremely thin. In one photo, its body was turned so it was silhouetted against the moon, and I could almost make out its hip bones. As I was scrolling through these photos, I was becoming really uneasy. I was sitting in my own bedroom, but I felt like something was watching me. As I looked closer at the photos, a chill ran down my spine. I had to get up and turn on my bedroom light because I felt like something was hiding in the shadows. I think that what really made me feel that way was the creature's eyes. In every single photo, they were bright, way brighter than the normal reflection of light in a raccoon or deer's eyes. I felt like they were looking at me, even though I was just looking at pictures. This feeling honestly kind of made me freak out. I didn't understand what it was, but I felt like I was panicking. The pictures were from miles away, but I felt like this creature was right here in my bedroom, or maybe just outside my window, staring at me. That's why I made a really rash decision. It was really stupid, and I regret it now. I wish I'd known that other people had stories of this thing, and maybe I'd have found a way to keep them. I deleted all the photos. I know it was dumb and impulsive, but it was the only way I could get that feeling to go away. It was like I was being haunted, like some evil spirit was hovering around me. It made me feel terrified and uneasy, and like I needed to run and hide, like those eyes were staring at me and wanted to rip me apart. I know that this story might seem far-fetched, but it really did happen. I've been avoiding going into the woods at night since then, just in case. I really avoid it when I'm at my grandpa's property. Every time I check my trail cameras, I kind of get a pit in my stomach. I'm really worried that I'll see it again. Part of me wants another picture, but part of me hopes I never see it again. My dad used to tell us stories about it even. He was a God-fearing man, not one to joke about evil and the devil. That's why I always believed in it growing up. My dad even joined a posse once to try and hunt the devil down in the swamps and pine lands. The posse was unsuccessful, obviously, since I've seen it myself all these many years later. So here's my story. I live in New Jersey and was on a hike with my dog out in the Pinelands. I've been retired for a few years now, and this is one of my main pastimes. I like to go out pretty far, away from other people, so I can keep the dog off leash. He likes it better that way, and so do I. So we were walking out there, and it all seemed pretty normal. I was admiring the trees because it was fall and all the colors were in full show. It was a very nice walk, and I was enjoying myself. I wish I could get myself to go back there because it was so lovely, but I'm too scared I'll run into it again. I knew there was a waterfall somewhere on this trail, and I was looking for the turnoff to go see that. The dog was probably 50 feet or so ahead of me, close enough that I could call him, and he'd come running back. As I was walking, I noticed a strange smell in the air. I know the dog noticed it too because he stopped and stuck his nose up and was sniffing the air. It smelled like sulfur. Now, like I said, I grew up hearing the stories. People always talked about the rotten egg smell. I hadn't thought about it before coming hiking out this far, but I realized that I could be deep in its territory. I mean, I knew I was pretty far out from civilization. The dog noticed the smell too. I knew because he kept holding his head in the air and sniffing, and it seemed like he was really freaked out. He turned around and came back to me and stuck by my side. He didn't bark or anything, just stuck his tail between his legs and hung by me. My heart was absolutely racing at this point. All signs were pointing to the fact that I was about to encounter something I had avoided for my whole life, and I was perfectly happy being one of the residents of this area who hadn't encountered it. I turned myself around, and my dog and I turned around and started heading back towards the car. I knew that it was a mile or two back and was trying to move fast. But of course, I'm old and retired and can only go so quickly. I was really trying to get back to the car, though. I was checking over my shoulder the entire time I walked back to the car. I never ran because I had seen on TV that you shouldn't run away from a tiger. If you run, that'll just snap its instinct into chasing you. I figured that the same logic would probably apply here. The rotten egg smell never let up the entire time, which made me sure that this thing was following me, so I was moving as fast as I could. I was absolutely terrified. There were stories of this thing breaking into barns and killing goats and chickens. I figured it could take me out too if it was hungry enough. The rotten egg smell got really strong for a moment, and that was when I knew it was probably right behind me. I was absolutely terrified, but I'd heard the stories and knew what to expect. I had to face the devil head on. I turned around and didn't see anything at first. I darted my gaze around trying to figure out where this thing really was. And then I saw it. It stepped out from behind a tree, into my full view. It really was a devil, some sort of evil creature spawned from hell. My heart hammered so hard because of terror and disbelief. If I wasn't positive I was about to be murdered by the thing, I probably would have been worried about having a heart attack. It was tall, probably 6 or 7 feet tall. It had 2 large wings, like the kind you would see on a gargoyle in a European cathedral. I don't really remember what its body or legs looked like. I really remember its head the best. It was a goat's head with red eyes and those disturbing square pupils. It never advanced on me. I don't know why it didn't. I was sure my life was about to end right there. It just looked at me as I backed away from it. Thank goodness the dog never barked. It was too scared. If the dog had barked, I'm sure it would have attacked, and that would have been the end of us. We did make it back to the car and back home. I haven't been able to go walking in the woods since. I just go on short little walks around the neighborhood now, safely within the highly populated areas. That thing haunts me in my sleep. Sometimes I close my eyes and I see those red eyes with their terrifying horizontal pupils. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go walking in the woods again. I've only told a few close people about my encounter. Just the older generation who knows that this creature is part of the countryside. I hate that I saw it. I hope that everyone who hears this story will be luckier than me. I saw something when I was 11 years old, and I've been scared to look in a mirror ever since. The Conjuring came out in 2013, and it was somewhat of a cultural phenomenon. Maybe it just seemed that way because it's all anybody talked about. Growing up, my parents were the most strict out of all my friends. This meant monitored internet access, limited late-night outings, and certainly no R-rated movies. So you can only imagine 11-year-old me and my excitement to have gotten the green light to stay the night at my friend's house, one fall night for a Halloween party. I showed up to the party sporting my best Harry Potter attire, and everybody else's costumes looked equally amazing. We carved pumpkins, danced to the Monster Mash, and ate way too much candy. When it came time for lights out, we all huddled in the basement, pulled out our pillows and blankets, and made ourselves cozy. The sleepover party portion of the night operated as you'd expect, considering it consisted of 7 or so middle schoolers. We had pizza and soda and talked about other kids in our grade. That was until my friend's older brother, Skylar, came downstairs with 2 of his friends, suggesting we watch a movie. Despite Skylar being only a couple years older than me, it felt as though he and his friends were worlds apart. That's why it came as no surprise that one of the boys had a copy of The Conjuring and insisted it would be the perfect movie to watch at a Halloween party. Even though I didn't really like scary movies, I was not going to be the one to suggest we watch something else. Like I said, this movie was all the rage at the time, and I think we knew that watching it and being able to talk about it at school would make the party 10x cooler. Looking back, I wish my mom was there to put a stop to the whole thing. Because there is no reason, I should still get goosebumps thinking about that night nearly 15 years later. Let me preface this by saying my friend's house was creepy as hell. The mere fact that we had to sleepover party in the basement should already have alluded to that. The house must have been built in a different century. The floors creaked as you walked around. The lights flickered at random times. There was a furnace in the basement, the only plus side of sleeping down there, as it was the warmest place in the house. But really, the worst part of it all was the abundance of antique paintings and knickknacks scattered around the home. I'm talking old porcelain dolls with cracks in their faces, armoires filled with vintage dishes and magazines, portraits of previous homeowners who must have been dead for ages. So yeah, it was the perfect place for a Halloween party, but not somewhere I would want to live on a regular basis. And certainly not somewhere that would make watching a scary movie any less terrifying than it already was. The Conjuring was easily the scariest movie I have seen, possibly because I steer clear of scary things. But even back then, I remember having consoled my one friend because of the plot twists and jump scares in this film. When all was said and done, it must have been past 1 a.m. But fortunately, within the next 30 minutes or so, everyone had fallen asleep. That was, everyone besides me. My mind was fixated on the fact that The Conjuring was based on a true story. And when I was doing my best not to think of that, the only other thing that popped into my head was how badly I needed to pee and how the bathroom was upstairs. Cutting to the chase, I was faced with a series of which is worse type scenarios. Was it worse to attempt to wake up one of my friends to come with me because I was too scared to go upstairs alone? Was it worse to wet the bed when I realistically knew there was no way I could hold it until morning? Was it worse to face my fears and just go upstairs alone? Ultimately, I chose the latter because either of the former just sounded embarrassing. I really couldn't afford to have this sleepover go bad when I was rarely invited to events like this anyway, and even rarer, allowed to attend. It took me every bit of 10 minutes to work up the courage to get up the stairs, and that's when all eyes were on me. Every porcelain doll in the living room felt like it was shooting targets through me, and frankly, I felt like I could hurl. I wasted no more time skating to the bathroom and slamming the door shut behind me despite having done my best to keep quiet. I did my business, went to wash my hands, and nearly leapt out of my skin when I glanced up at the mirror. For a split second, a grimacing, almost blurry figure was hovering behind me. But in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I washed my hands faster than you can even imagine, flung open the door, prepared to sprint back down to the basement, and that's when I saw it. The same figure in the mirror, semi-transparent, grimacing, and dark. I remember feeling instantaneously cold and the air around me seemed to go still. I slammed the door and screamed a scream so vile, I had no doubt it woke the neighbors. The next few minutes passed in a blur, and it's hard to sort the memories through the haze. All I know is eventually my friend's parents came crashing into the bathroom, pleading for me to tell them what was wrong, but I was in a trance. My mom picked me up that night, and I've never been so happy to see her in my life. Needless to say, I never went to that place again, nor did I engage with scary movies or sleepovers until well into my high school years. I can't say for sure what it was I saw that night. All I know is its presence was demonic and felt like something straight out of The Conjuring.